Welcome to episode 6 of the Retro Baseball Game Challenge, where I'm playing every old baseball video game I can get my hands on, and in today's episode, I'm playing Bases Loaded 3, which was one of 4 different Bases Loaded games to come out for the NES. Remember to stay tuned till the end of the video to see where I rank them on all the games we've played so far, and let's get started. When turning on Bases Loaded 3 for the first time using my EverDrive, we have a few options to choose from: single player, 2-player, watch, and edit. Let's go ahead and jump right into a single player game to see what we're working with. I should note that despite Sandberg being on the cover of this game, there is no Major League Baseball license, team, or player, so the selection screen is just a mixed mash of city names and fake players. After choosing our team, there are 3 stadiums to choose from, which represent the 3 real-life stadiums of Wrigley Field, Dodger Stadium, and Yankee Stadium. But they obviously don't mention them by name, and unfortunately all play pretty much identical to one another. What may be a bit shocking at first, and what should get your attention immediately, is that, in fact, yes, I'm hitting, but the camera angle is from the pitcher's perspective. This was a shock and made hitting very frustrating out the gate, and I was ready to blast the makers of this game for this decision, but bear with me here and I'll explain why it's not as crazy as it looks or sounds a little later on. What is kind of crazy though is that the game doubles down on this fielding perspective when it comes to selecting bases. Instead of the home plate being mapped to the down button, it's mapped to the up button, which also reverses first and third base. This kind of makes sense from a fielding perspective, even if it feels odd, but because it carries over to hitting, it will involve you constantly selecting the wrong base for a long time. It took about, 8, 9, maybe 10 games or so before I wasn't giving the computer several freebies from throwing to the wrong base. The game is also plagued with a huge learning curve with fielding pretty much right out the gate as well. Because of this center-based camera angle, fielders don't come into screen until the very last second, and honestly, it's the worst I've seen in any baseball video game. You control all fielders at the same time, which is fine, so choosing a specific fielder is not an issue, but many easy flyouts or grounders become hits simply because you have no idea where your fielders actually are. The early footage you see here is just plagued with me trying to get used to how to properly field in this game, an issue that never fully goes away because of the awkward game design decisions made here. Even though these first 2 games were messy to say the least, particularly from a fielding and running perspective, I was starting to get used to the hitting and pitching, and well, I'm learning to like it. Well, maybe not like it, but at least tolerate it. There was way more depth here than I was expecting, and I'll explain why. Swing location and timing behaved semi-realistically, leading to way more hit possibilities than I was expecting for a game of this era. Plenty of grounders, line drives, and flyouts all helped make the game feel like it was properly tracking my abilities. Unlike other NES games, you can see the ball curve up and down and not just side to side, essentially tripling the number of locations you can try to swing. That's somewhat revolutionary in my opinion and executed pretty well, and kind of justifies the switch to the flipped camera angle. This applies to pitching, which is a 3-part process in and of itself. You just don't select the location, but by hitting the A button over and over, you can control how far in one direction you want to place a pitch. For example, if you want to throw a slightly inside fastball, hold right and press A once. But if you want to run it into the batter's box, hold right and press A like 4 times. After this, you can control the speed and motion of the pitch, allowing you to throw actual curveballs that have a verticality to them, something that other NES games do not have. It really works once you get used to it, and is more engaging and responsive than I thought at first. Even though I'm mostly praising the hitting and pitching, I can't emphasize enough that fielding and base running is such a mess, and that detracts from a lot of the positives. Even when my brain was getting used to the flipped field, I still was not loving how much of a guessing game the fielding is. I eventually learned that the left and right fielders kind of hug the foul lines a bit, and this helped me know where they were, even though there's nothing visually or map or anything to help with this. Also, once I figured out how to stop running into double plays, base running wasn't as frustrating. But when the runners advance on every sign of contact, it's so annoying having to force them to come back basically every single time. And just look how the AI works during rundowns here. And this pretty much sums up what I think of the base running in this game. Now back to the gameplay. After playing 2 disasters of exhibition games, I truly was wondering if this was going to be a huge chore to keep playing. And that's when the game started clicking a bit more. Games 3 and 4 went better, and I'm happy to say that this was mostly a learning curve issues in the first couple of games, which is to be expected considering how different the developers tried to think outside the box, and how the flipped field goes against every other baseball game I've ever played. What I began to pick up on was how advanced the hitting and pitching mechanics were compared to other NES games I've played so far. Having all the alternative diagonal angles I mentioned before led to a way more engaging system. I really feel like this game was trying to advance hitting and pitching versus just settling for the same old design we've accepted as status quo for the NES era. These 2 games were also the first time I didn't get mercy ruled and actually got to the end of the game. Just when I was thinking more positively about this game again, that's when it got extra weird. So I skipped this before, but when a game starts, you'll see a text scroll challenging you to play a quote perfect game. Even the back of the box indicates this as well. You see, there is no season mode here. The main game mode is to play a series of games perfectly. Well, what does that mean? It was at this point I found out there were like 15 factors or so that the game keeps track of during the game and penalizes you for doing anything poorly. For example, if you throw even one pitch with a pitcher that has 0 stamina, you'll be docked points for that. So all future games I was more on top of my pitchers as well. But this, along with 14 other factors, will determine if you've played a well enough game to advance to the next one. Winning helps, but is just one small factor in this 15-part equation. Basically, after getting a score on this scale, the game will choose to advance you to the next level opponent or not. After winning 2 more games in a row, I had my first true test against a tougher opponent. I didn't make a ton of mistakes, so my score was good enough to skip a few steps and actually go right from a level 2 to a level 4 opponent. Another new discovery that I didn't know existed. The game at first didn't seem all that different from a pitching, fielding, or speed perspective against this level 4, but the one thing that became significantly trickier was the hitting. Pitchers definitely mixed up what they were throwing more, forcing you to become way more patient and try to read pitches and trends better. I also think the timing window for making good contact is also decreased, so you really have to pay attention to make good contact. Even though I didn't play all that well in this game, I appreciated the difficulty, and it easily has the best feeling hitting for any game from this era I've played so far for this challenge, but we'll see once we play some others like RBI Baseball, Baseball Stars, or maybe Tecmo Baseball, to name a few. I ultimately lost this one 4-1, which I think started me back over against a level 1 opponent to try again. So yeah, that was my journey to playing Bases Loaded 3. With no true season mode or anything, there's really not that much more to talk about. Edit mode adds a little bit of depth, I guess, but the appeal to this game is playing and beating a level 5 opponent while also putting up a perfect score. I don't really have the patience or desire to master this, and I find the gameplay goal of this to be kind of boring, but that is ultimately the appeal to the game. In the end, I think you could summarize this game as the developer trying to innovate and be something completely different, and the result was mixed in every sense of the word. So let's move on to our final grades. Alright, so up first here is hitting. And so despite the camera perspective being oddly from the field looking in, the hitting here is actually not bad. The typical move left and right in the batter's box while pressing A to swing is here, but you can also aim high or low when you swing too, which might have been a first for baseball gaming at the time. I'm not sure, but it's at least the first I've experienced something from this era. The types of hits you have also behave more realistically than other NES games I've played and are more significantly varied, which once you get used to the camera angle, you'll see is considerably more polished than other games from this era. Similar to hitting, pitching also tries to innovate, but again to some more mixed results. Besides just pressing a location and controlling the pitch curve left or right, the game introduces diagonal elements to the pitching. There's also a timing element, so location might start in one place pre-windup, but the speed and actual location can simultaneously be altered during the windup, which makes it way more engaging, even if your pitcher doesn't always seem to do what you want them to. Now, unfortunately, moving on here to fielding and base running, everything here is way off compared to other elements of the game. And the big issue is not being able to see the position of your outfielders until the very last second on anything hit to the outfield. Until you basically memorize where your fielders usually stand, it's a complete guessing game, and even when you kind of get used to the positioning, it's still not a great system. I do like how the game rewards the speed of your throw based on how quickly you choose a base, but this also leads to a lot of accidental mistakes too. And now base running, I won't talk about anymore, is just really a mess, a complete disaster, and it's a battle just to keep your runners from doing the most dumb things. Now, presentation-wise, this game takes a nice step forward for baseball gaming. They went for that TV angle approach, and I learned to like it over time. Other aspects of the presentation, though, are really basic. The music is repetitive, but the players and main camera are enough to keep things somewhat interesting here. And finally, the replay value here is probably the game's biggest weak point. It might just be a sign of the era, but not having any stat tracking or normal single-player mode makes this a pick-up-and-play game that doesn't have pick-up-and-play controls. So not a fan of the lack of depth here. The edit mode doesn't do enough either for me. I do believe there are some good baseball games from this era, but Bases Loaded 3 is not one of them. But it might be the most interesting from a gameplay perspective. I appreciate the attempt to innovate here with the new camera angle and trying to advance hitting and pitching mechanics, but the game is held back with the strange game design of making it all about playing the quote perfect game, while also being hampered by some odd fielding and base running decisions. I've been wavering between a C and D throughout the making of this video, but it's objectively better than Mike Piazza's Strike Zone. So yeah, I'll put it in front of that disaster, since once you get used to the flaws, I think the game is decently fun. Still, it falls short of being, Yeah, I would say it falls short of passing Super Baseball Simulator 1000, so I'll go with a C ranking right behind that game. I just wish maybe I could take the NES version of Baseball Simulator 1000 and combine it with the best aspects of this game, and you would have a good, if not great, game on their own, but right now they're just too flawed. It's like for every step that Bases Loaded 3 takes, it takes another one right back. It does make me interested in playing some of the Bases Loaded games that came before and after it, so perhaps down the road I'll take a look at some of those. But for my next video, I'll actually be playing Home Run King for the Nintendo GameCube. This got my attention because it's kind of like a one-off baseball game from Sega that never had any sequels and was exclusive to the GameCube. That's really weird, right? Definitely the most unknown game for the series this far, I think. I mean, I've heard of it before somehow, but of course never played it, so I'm excited to see where it lands on my list. And until then, please subscribe to be notified for the next video, and thanks for watching.